Hello guys, welcome back to another lesson with Rivera Fine Art Studios. So I am continuing to work on this colored pencil portrait. I have two other videos which are on this channel, which show you the beginning stages of this. And this was actually taken from one of my online classes, and I'm going to just continue to add more and more detail to this. So what you can see right now is I'm working on the hair. And this is something in particular that I thought would make a very good lesson because it's something that a lot of people struggle with. Now, the trick to hair is to make sure that you are, in fact, observing your values. And we get a lot of light shapes and dark shapes. And as we're starting off, I think that's very, very important. That shows a number of things. It shows how the light is hitting the hair, and the hair is formed just like anything else. So you're going to get areas where the lights are standing out, because those are areas that are sticking out and the light's catching them, and then other areas that are falling back into shadow. And within that, we have a huge complex network of smaller shapes, but we have to first really recognize the larger shapes. So what I'm doing right now, for example, is toning down this area that I see as a general dark mass. And the area right to the left of it is sticking out, so the light's catching that. So I have to sort of see the difference between the darkness and the lightness of those two general shapes. And the other really important thing is understanding the relationships between our values as well as our colors. Eventually I'm going to add color to this, but I always see the value before I see the color. And I think if we can really develop sort of a practice of establishing the right value first, it makes color so much easier. And that's why I'm going in right now and I'm just using a regular graphite pencil to lay this in as a sort of a general mass. And I'm actually going much, much lighter. This is something that I've talked about in some of my previous videos, because I know that I'm going to keep building into this and making it darker and adding more and more layers. So I've just sped this video up a little bit now to show a little more content. And as you can see, I'm just continuing to mass in this darker value with my graphite pencil. And I'm really just kind of sectioning it off. I'm looking at this section, and I'm going to spend many hours just working on this little section to show you once again how I would develop this. So the next step is to begin adding a few extra strands into this shadow mass. And you can see that I've done that using the raw umber. I've just put a few additional marks in there, and that's going to help guide me. So as I continue to go darker and darker with my value, I'm going to work around some of these marks, because this is areas where I actually see slightly lighter hairs that are sort of integrated into the shadow mass. There's a few extra strands that are picking up a little bit of the light. Now, working on something like this can be a little bit challenging. We don't have the option to actually add opaque lights. So what I can do is, on occasion, I'll come in and I'll just sort of scrape out a little bit of tone once I've laid it down. If that tone is really, really heavy on the paper, you can take an X-Acto blade, which you saw me just do, and lift a little bit of that out to bring the light back. Another technique which works wonderfully is to use a finely sharpened electric eraser. However, a little bit of planning in the beginning, if we just kind of draw out some of those shapes, we can very easily shade around that. And, I kind of do that most of the time, and then on occasion I'll use the razor blade or an electric eraser. Okay, so now I'm going over my lights using an Indian yellow. And this is just a general light that I'm sort of filling in, because right now what I have is too pale. So this is just warming it up and slightly darkening it. Okay, so now I'm coming back with some of my browns, and I'm using two browns for this drawing. One is a sepia, which is a bit of a reddish brown. That's what I'm using right now. And then for my darker areas of shadow, I'm using my raw umber. But the sepia over top of the Indian yellow is really nice because that sort of gives it that blondish, almost auburn color, which is what I'm shooting for. And as I do this, I'm kind of turning my pencil periodically. So I'm sort of going back and forth between trying to create sharp edges and really crisp details. And then at other times, I'm just trying to soften edges, and work on transitions. There's many, many variables when it comes to hair. Depending on how the light's hitting it, sometimes you will see individual strands and they'll be very crisp and very sharp, and then other times you'll see more of a general mass. So I'm constantly going back and forth between trying to intensify the detail and then trying to soften the detail. Now, having stated that, it's still important to sort of have a map to help guide you. So I did sketch everything out in terms of the large shapes, and that's still something that I'm going to be looking at and paying attention to, and also just trying to keep track of how my parts are relating. Because when we get super caught up in detail, it's so easy to overdo it. So we have to constantly think about the whole picture. I do take breaks and I keep stepping back to see how things look from a few feet away. I think that's very, very important. And the other thing that's important is doing studies, doing smaller studies, simpler studies. You can do color studies or value studies. Very often I will do that. I didn't do that for this drawing, but a lot of times I will do that. And that helps keep all this information kind of organized in my brain. And I'll have my study right next to my final piece as I'm working. So it'll really be used as a guide. So now I am coming back with my raw umber and I am pushing my darks a little bit darker. You can see there's quite a big difference now. And I'm really starting to push down into the paper with the pencil. I'm still not going for full pressure, but I am trying to fill in a lot of the little gaps that I'm getting simply because I'm seeing the tooth of the paper. So I sort of hold off on that for as long as I can. I don't want to compromise that tooth until I'm really ready to commit to sort of a final layer of color. And the other thing is I'm really only doing that in the darkest areas. So it kind of goes back to what I was saying before. We have to keep track of, which areas are light, which areas are dark, just in terms of our general values. And it's not to say that I can't break into my light areas. I'm doing that right now with a few small details. But in general, my darkest tones are really within my shadow mass. So I'm going to focus my attention on that as I begin to really increase my darks. So I just wanted to take a moment to talk about some of the classes which I offer. If you're interested in pre-recorded classes, you can find that simply by going to www.riverafineartstudios.thinkific.com, and that will take you to my online school, which has currently 4 classes, and these are all portrait drawing techniques. So I'm showing you right now the Advanced Portrait Drawing Techniques class, and this just kind of goes into the basics of how to set up the portrait using measuring techniques, and then how to work with values using charcoal and pencil. And I offer this content. It's very in-depth, and I give you a step-by-step approach of how to create a tonal drawing in this course in particular. I also talk about things like anatomy and, really how to understand the forms of the face and so forth. So this is very in-depth content. If you're interested, I would definitely recommend that. In this course in particular, I also talk a little bit about how to create value studies, and this information can be carried into other drawings or paintings. So it's very applicable to whatever you want to do with the information. I will be adding a colored pencil portrait class to that site soon, and I'll make sure that I provide links in the description below if you are interested. Okay, so now I have really, I'm starting to push the darkness, but as you can see, I'm somewhat limited in the colored pencils as far as exactly how far I can push that dark range. And if I am really trying to get the depth that I'm looking for in the hair, I need to, at this point, switch over to a Micron black ink pen. And I did use that in a few other areas, including the hair up here. You can see the darkness of the shadow areas here versus that. I also used that in the eyes, in the nostrils, and a little bit in the mouth. But that just really helps to punch up that contrast. And you can see right now I'm using a very dark color. This is my raw umber, and I'm really just starting to bear down with this, but you know, I'm kind of limited. That's about as far as I can go, which is not the same as that. It's not really a true dark. The trick to this is not to overdo it when you're using the pen. You don't want to add darks everywhere, but there's a few places within particularly this area where I do want to push my darks a little bit more. Right here, for example, this is where a tuft of hair is kind of falling over top of all of this in here. And if I just come in with my, my pen and I do a little bit of stippling, that will help to show that contrast. What I like about the pen too is it gives me a lot of control as far as my edges. So if I want to create very sharp edges, I can do that as well. So it's a wonderful tool to use in combination with other mediums such as colored pencil and also regular pencil. I've used this quite a bit with regular pencil. And what I like to do is typically stipple over my area. If I was to go in and start to shade in the same way that I've been shading with the pencil, I'm going to get a lot of scratchy lines and it's not going to look very good. The stippling actually gives me very soft, smooth gradations, and it allows me to control exactly how dark I want to go. The idea is with the dots, when we cluster them together and overlap them, we can really control that dark range. If we spread the dots out, we can go a little bit lighter in our value. But that is essentially how I would begin to really push these darks. So as you can see, this technique does take quite a while, but it's really worth it. It's very labor intensive, but it is worth it. And it starts off with really the simple picture, you know, finding those big shapes first, and then just adding more and more detail and looking at ways to add contrast and sharpness of edges, and then other times softening edges. So I hope you enjoyed today's presentation. If you are interested in my online classes, you can find those on my website, which is www.riverafinearts.com. Or if you'd rather purchase my pre-recorded classes, you can find those at www.riverafineartsstudios.thinkific.com. Thank you.